Welcome to HSBN Today, where we share today's news from a biblical perspective. I'm Dr. Diane Hunter, and I'm so glad you could join me today. And today we have 4 topics that we'll be discussing. The first one is from Ganglands to hope. The second one, arts God gave. The third one is how going to prison for a crime I didn't commit changed my life for the better. And the last one is a retreat in Indonesia is disrupted. So this first one, in the heart of Hanover Park in Cape Cod Flats in South Africa, Pastor Gavin Ingle, he and his team from a local church, they stand against the unrelenting tide of violence. They live in a vibrant community which is deeply unequal in the city of Cape Town. And this community is described as just depressing in the neighborhood. There's drab buildings, there's unemployed people, and especially the men just kind of wandering around, which is ripe for gang activity. And it's where almost daily there's stabbings and gunshots. So not a safe place at all. And the paradox is, though, that Africa's wealthiest city is also Cape Town. I mean, both of them. There's the devastation of gang life and violence, and then there's the very wealthy. And it grapples with that stark reality between the two. And it's the gang capital of murder there. And the murder rate is double the national average, which says quite a bit. And the gangs, what they do is, and I kind of have a feel for this because I used to teach in downtown and very west Long Beach. It was right on the other side of Compton by the refineries. And they recruit the gangs. They recruit the young people as young as, like it says here, 8 to 15. And when they get them young and they work to shape their identity and their loyalty and alliance to them, then often they're hooked, which is tragic. And the violence and the pervasiveness of what goes on there, there's emergency services and the police department, like they don't even want to go in. They don't even want to be a part of it because they know how devastating it is and even dangerous to them. And so there's a team of ex-gangsters that Pastor Ingle is a part of and is leading up. And they're building bridges to reduce violence in the community and so that people in general can be safer. So kids can walk to school and they can play outside. Like they're trying to rebuild the community where it actually feels like a community. And because Pastor Ingle and his team were all gangsters formerly themselves, they look at it differently to bring people out. They treat violence like a disease, not like you choose this, so because of that, you're wicked and you're bad. They're like, okay, you were in a community where this was pervasive and a part of who you were, and it's changed your life. And so these gangsters, because of the prison culture that they understand, and many of them were in, they work differently with the people that they're bringing out of the lifestyle. Almost 70% of the young people that they're struggling with in gangs and in the community are addicted to some kind of substance. And usually it's like heroin or cocaine. And environmentally, the people from the youngest age up, they've been contaminated with violence. So their mindset is just different. There's been drugs and domestic violence just everywhere. Like it's not uncommon to, to hear yelling in the streets and to hear, cussing here and it's a hard place to live. And so people live protected, and often they live addicted because they try to numb out the pain. So in this trauma that's going on all around them, they try to tone down the drama in their brains. But this is where the team, Pastor Engel's team, has been such a help to the community. The program has already rehabilitated 168 high-risk gangsters. That's a big deal. If you take a community and there's one or two that have been rehabilitated and are now living in truth, standing against what's been going on, that would make a difference. But if you take 168, you're turning the tide on the whole community. And that brings tremendous hope. So one man who's been rehabilitated, his name was Wesley, and he had been in a violent gang, and he became the leader in the community. So because people knew him as a gangster, because he had been rehabilitated, now he has the ear and the eye of the community, of people looking to see, okay, his life has changed. So he shared the value of stepping out of the gang lifestyle so that the community knows his story and they know his past and they respect him. So what does that lead to? Then they're more inclined to listen to him. See, that's what we need in ministry. We need people who have been there and who have come out of it and are now walking in freedom and walking in truth. And that's what Christ can do. Don't be ashamed of where you've been, of what kind of sin you've lived in. When Christ redeems you and frees you from that, you now get to live as a new creation. Now, you still likely need to work through the stuff that got you there. You need to reconcile and ask for forgiveness and different things. And it doesn't mean that it's all like, okay, like it never happened. But God forgives you like it never happened. And then you get to personally and relationally and interrelationally walk it out. So there are challenges, there are hurdles, there are things people have to press through, there's funding cuts. And so now a lot of the negotiators working to rehabilitate people and to train them up, now they have to volunteer because there's no longer the payment that there was. And so Pastor Engel and his team, they press on and they're undeterred because they see where they've been, they know where they are, and they know that other people can also get free. So regardless of the setbacks, regardless of the threats of violence and the fear and anxiety that come with living in and trying to work with a community that's just entrenched in this lifestyle, they're determined, though, to build resilience. And that's what it takes. They create hope for people, and they grow. And they teach people how to grow because it's needed. And so, what can we do as believers around the world? This is South Africa. What can we do as a world, as a community in the world, and in our individual communities as we learn from theirs? We build hope, we learn how to trust, and we get freed from addictions and the things that have trapped people in the past. Okay, that leads to our second topic, the arts God gave. This story is interesting to me. Now, I'm gonna tell you who's involved in it, but then we're just gonna jump right in. So it's the Global Ethnodoxology Network, and they abbreviate it GEN. Now, what does ethnodoxology even mean? It's, okay, globally, the people that are different ethnicities, different people groups, how they praise God. The study of praise, the doxology of this network that comes together and acknowledges differences. And it's interesting because I grew up in a church that was very formal. I went to a school that we did liturgy, and it was much more like high church. And then I've been to vineyard churches and Pentecostal churches and charismatic churches and churches that are just free and you can raise your hands and worship. And it's interesting because even in Christianity in the United States, there's such a variety. Well, then when you go around the world, and that's what our story is about today, you see how it's necessary to tap into culture and the style and how people learn and how people worship. It's actually an incredible and beautiful thing. So we use the gifts that we have in whatever culture we're in to share Jesus and to learn how to worship him and connect to God. So Negreo's journey began with this personal dilemma. So he was a musician. He trained in learning the violin, which is actually a difficult instrument to learn because there's no keys, there's just strings. And as you move the bow along different strings, it makes incredibly beautiful sound. And so he was studying that, which is great. But then he began to sense God's call into missions. And he's like, how am I going to do missions? Like, how is what I'm studying in music going to help me around the world in missions? So he struggled. And he's like, are you sure, God? Or how is this going to work? Or whatever. But God resolved his conflict by showing him that he could help others learn to worship. He could help, using music, he could help others worship even in a different style. So that began his journey. So Christians engage with God and engage with the world based on their own artistic expression. And I love this. I remember my husband and I went on a mission trip to Africa in 2008. And we were there for 6 weeks. And it was stunning to go to the different countries. We went to 6 different countries in Central Africa. And the dance was incredible. And just the music. And they didn't have a lot of instruments. So just they found stuff to drum, to beat on, to make sound and to make rhythm. Rhythm was huge for them. And the kids, it was so fun to see how just the kids were raised in that. And then they had this special, I can't even do it right now because I'll probably mess the microphone up, but they had this special howl, this, it was like a hoot and a howl. And it was almost like a yell, but it was it was totally in sync and unified. And it stirred my spirit like I wanted to do it. So I did, and I loved it because I felt such a freedom. And it was very second nature to them. They did it all the time. Like if I were to do that in my church, people would be like, is she okay? What happened to her? But it's like, no, I'm worshiping. So it is fun that different cultures do that. So with the global ethnodoxology network, they use anthropology, they use worship studies, they use sociology, they use the arts, they use a combination to connect people with different things, movements, sounds, to bring them to Jesus. And they help the community understand the arts and reach its kingdom goals. And the value of this ministry, both in worship and in community transformation, is huge. The South Africans Women Choir sang a hymn based on their own tradition and their music style. They spoke out a message that could be heard by the people there. And the message was, they sang, it was a special song they sang, men, stop beating your wives. Men, stop beating your wives. Men, stop beating your wives. And they did it in a way that it was received. If a speaker had just gotten up there and said it, it wouldn't have necessarily gotten into the soul and into the rhythm of the people from that culture. And that was huge. So it was delivered in a culturally appropriate way. And another example happened in a Brazilian village where children didn't understand that they needed to brush their teeth. And so they composed a song in their community's musical style that encouraged it. And it's like, okay, we can teach health things, we can teach spiritual truths, and we can bring about this, whether it's evangelism, literacy, public health. Artistic expression helps in both communication and discipleship. So they use festivals, drama, storytelling, and they retell biblical truths in a way that they can be received. So the local arts are used for many purposes. And in many non-Western cultures, the arts are deeply important because of sound and rhythm. And it's the main way that people in those communities, they can share the serious messages which need to be heard. And so we bless our neighbors around the world, and we bless what they're doing in how they're sharing truth. And I love that. Our third topic, initially this felt really sad to me. I'm like, oh no, how going to prison for a crime I didn't commit changed my life for the better. I read this story and I felt for this man who got unjustly committed and arrested to prison. But I looked at God's redemption in it. And so this is what happened. Wilson Themai returns from prison for a different reason this time. He brings a message of hope. When he first walked into the prison, it was not by choice. It was not by calling. He was accused of a crime because in 2005, he was actually studying at a Bible college. He was teaching in a children's ministry, and he loved it. He wanted to go into ministry. So he started actually going to school to become a minister. But there's another facet of the church that became jealous of him because he was receiving more funds for the ministry that he did. And they wanted to disqualify his ministry. So to do that, they had to remove him from the church. And their jealousy sparked, they created a lie. They started lying about him and accusing him of a crime he did not commit. But the police, so what they did was, police came to his college he was going to. They arrested him and humiliated him in front of other people. He said it was humiliating because they put him in handcuffs and everyone, like the other students, could see him. And then they dragged the trial on for 3 years. But thankfully, he got out on bail. He continued his studies, and he actually graduated from college while going through the trial process, which, as you can imagine, would be very difficult. He says, I graduated from college on April 3rd, 2008. The very next day, I was convicted and sent to prison. And he says, it was like I graduated for prison, which is pretty phenomenal because he was already ministering the gospel. He had a perspective that God had purpose in it. That's something powerful to look at. How many of us have the perspective in our lives when something unjust happens, like, okay, God, what are you doing here? Because I know that I'm innocent of this. I know I'm being persecuted. I know that there are lies against me. So I'm going to lean into you, and I'm going to see what you're doing and how you're going to use this. That's such a beautiful, godly perspective. That's what God wants from us, for us. But anyway, he served 6 months in prison. He was in prison for 6 months. And in the midst of the confusion and the hardship and just the crazy things, the abuse, everything that can happen in prison, like, it's not a fun place. I've been to prisons in both other countries and here. I think that it's just like, oh God, bless these people, heal them, save them, redeem them, do your work here, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It can be scary. And he was just like, okay. He started to understand that God was calling him for a purpose. And so after 6 months, his appeal was accepted, was received. He was exonerated and freed. And he's been giving his life to prison ministry ever since. He actually started an organization. He's the founder and executive director of Prison Ministry Fellowship in Zimbabwe. And he leads programs to transform prisoners' lives and their families. And that's what he does. He works with, he has two different things. There's the prisoner's journey, where he teaches prisoners in more than 30 prisons. So how many prisoners are in each prison? I don't know, but multiply that. 30 prisons times all the prisoners in each one that attend these services. And then there's the Promise Path. And that's for the children of the people who are imprisoned. Because if Feme can work with the prisoners and their families to bring restoration, then when they get out of prison, the kids still have a relationship with their parents, and hopefully their parents have gotten saved and also have come to God and received the truth of his calling in their life. Because when people get forgiven and they get on the right path, then they can do what God's called them to do. And God uses what's been done that's been hurtful or negative to build authority in each of our lives in that area where there was breakdown and then there was redemption. I love that about God. So the story is about God reaching out to restore people who have sinned, who are broken, and who have lost their way. And that's what we see in the Bible. We see the Bible is a story about prisoners who have been released. Excuse me. We were prisoners to sin, and through Christ, we have been released. And that's what this ministry is trying to do. Jesus was arrested. Jesus was convicted. He was mocked. He was imprisoned, and he died a criminal's death so that he could be risen from the dead, he could raise from the dead, and we can receive new life. So we surrender because God may use us in a way that is not fun and that we never dreamed of. Feme, who's now the director of this prison ministry, never dreamed that he would be sentenced as an innocent man to go to prison. But because he surrendered to God and because he saw what God did and what God wanted to do, how many thousands, tens of thousands, hopefully millions and millions of people, their lives have been changed. And that is the gospel message. That leads us to our last topic. And this is a retreat in Indonesia got disrupted. So about 200 Muslims, and this happened on Friday, stormed a Christian youth retreat center. And, well, actually, it was a home. It was a big home, I guess, in Indonesia. And they were having a Christian retreat there. And the police and the soldiers just looked on. And they let the Muslims who were attacking just continue to go on. There's a mob. They drove out the participants. They damaged property. They broke windows. They broke toilets. They broke the gazebo, the garden. They carried banners and shouted, "Destroy this house! Destroy the house!" And officers did evacuate 36 of the Christian youth and retreat participants who got in like cars, I think 3 cars, to avoid physical violence. And a video showed like these frightened kids, these boys and these girls that were trying to get in the car while the mob was yelling at them. And the incident occurred because the residents of the area, they were against the retreat. They did not want a house to be a place of worship, and they thought they needed official permission to do that. So that's why this upheaval started. And the Muslims declared that there are rules, and you cannot worship in a place that is not specifically designated for worship. You can't just worship in a home. That's what they said. So they had talks with the officials in the district, and they came to an agreement where the retreat people, the leaders, would not press charges, and they would resolve their conflicts through discussion. So that the grace they extended was beautiful, and the forgiveness and just saying, we're not going to make you pay for all of this, and we're not going to press charges and make you, go to prison or whatever. So hopefully they came to an agreement where they did, reconcile payment and whatever they did. But the advocates described the case as a matter of intolerance. And this religious freedom activist said, that's so wrong, because in this area you can't just have intolerance. You have to let people worship where they want to worship. And it seems like the government is Christian phobia, where they turn a blind eye, where they just look the other way when Christians are involved, and they let the people in the area create damage and harm and conflict. And so the Christian students in Sukabumi were attacked by residents, evicted from their villas, and the villas were destroyed. And it does reflect an anti-Christian sentiment, but Indonesia has been conservative Islamic community, and that's what they keep pressing into. But the churches involved in the evangelistic outreach, they're like, okay, what can we do? How can we do what God's called us to do and spread the good news? Like, how is that possible? And one thing as believers, we know that we can worship anywhere. We could worship at home. We could worship when we go for a walk. We can worship when you're taking a shower. You can worship anywhere, all the time, in every place. And this story, it brings up, there's not a lot of resolve in the social interaction of it or the religious coming into agreement or unity with it. There's still a conflict with, this is the way it should be according to Islam Sharia law. And even though it's an area of Indonesia where it's not forbidden to be Christian, there's still a much pressing down and turning away from that, where it can be dangerous to be a Christian. And so what do we get to do as Christians around the world? We get to pray into the safety. We get to pray into truth and the justice of God and the mercy of God. That God give dreams and visions, that God turn people's hearts to hear his truth. So those are our topics for today. Thank you so much for joining us for our news topic from a biblical perspective. And I bless you. If you want to contact us, the information's running at the bottom of the screen, the phone number for HSBN, the prayer line. And we bless you. We bless you in every way to be aware of what's going on around the world and to be a part of it spiritually as we pray. God bless you.